In this position, your opponent captures your knight. What would you do? 60% of players recaptured with a queen, blundering this move, a knight fork, losing a pawn and a rook in the corner. A knight is the trickiest chess piece, and those types of blunders are actually the most frequent. Today I'd love to share with you some simple actionable tips on how to stop blunders like that and how you can make use of knight forks yourself effectively. Let's say you're playing this position as white. Where would you move your king? Please think about this. By the way, we're starting off from these basic, simple endgame positions just because here it is easier to see those patterns. And later, of course, we'll see how same patterns will work out throughout the game. So if you want to move your king, think about this. One of the most natural things for white to do here, especially if you're low on time and it was a blitz game, is just to advance the king forward. But then you can indeed overlook that knight fork and all of a sudden you lost your queen. Similarly, if you move your king right here, that would also fail to the same fork. Again, a knight is super tricky, so we gotta be extremely careful, especially when you're low on time. It's not all that easy to calculate all that accurately. But here's a simple rule that makes your task a lot easier. Think about this thing. A knight only attacks squares of the same color, in this case, dark squares. Therefore, a knight cannot even theoretically fork pieces standing on opposite colors, such as your king and queen in the current situation. Therefore, if you wish to avoid any kind of forks without calculating anything, even if you have seconds left on the clock, just keep them on opposite colors, your king and your queen. So as long as I keep my king on a dark color, let's say I move it here, or here, I don't even have to calculate anything, right? I know for the fact that black will not be able to fork me. Here's another helpful idea. It is white to play and you need to win the game. By the way, your pawn moves up, moves that way. How would you win this game as white? What would you play here? You may think about this for a couple of seconds. Like the first intent might be to just push your passer pawn forward. But if you do that, the knight is right on time to control this square and you can't win. After this, black will bring their king over. Therefore, we need to do something else. And here comes another interesting question. To learn this rule, not just for this position, but for any games that you play, especially endgames, of course. What is the safest square for your king here? And by saying the safest, I mean that it takes the longest for a knight to deliver a check to your king. Think about this. Like, where should it go so that it's harder for a knight to deliver a check? For example, the king cannot go here because that square is already controlled by the knight, therefore it is clearly unsafe. How about this square? Is it safe? No, it only takes one move for a knight going here or here to deliver a check. Just a move. If we move it here, is this safe? We're trying to keep it as far away from the knight as possible. Is this really safe? Well, it's a little bit better, but not really safe. This time it takes only two moves for a knight to deliver a check. And for example, he can go knight b8, one move. From here it also threatens the pawn. And if we wish to save it, we fail to yet another fork. And it only took black two moves to deliver this check, and we blunder the fork. He's going to capture our pawn and save the game. Long story short, the safest square for your king is this square b5, known as a diagonal opposition. We have this one square in between, and that's why we call it an opposition. Now, from here, it takes three moves for a knight to deliver a check. It needs to go something like this, 1, 2, 3, and then it's a check. And just think about this. It takes the same amount of moves for a knight to deliver a check as if your king standing right here in the corner of the board on h1. If the king were right there, as far as possible from a knight, it would still take same three moves for a knight to deliver a check. Therefore, this position on b5 is actually extremely efficient. We're close to actions, but also it's extremely hard for a knight to deliver any forks. Therefore, you can never blunder them if a knight cannot check you at all. And in the current example, you win the game easily. Afterwards, the knight can't do anything, and you just push your pawn forward. And here's the third way to restrict a knight. It is still white to move, the pawn is still moving that way. How do you play here if you're a white? Again, if you just try the most straightforward approach, just to advance your passer pawn forward, in this case, they may use the knight to stop your pawn. Now, your knight cannot go across this diagonal, but they can reroute it like that, and now they do control this square, as well as attack your pawn, therefore they will be able to trade a knight for a pawn and to achieve a theoretical draw. Instead, the correct way is to restrict the knight first by going bishop d5. This way you took away any squares where a knight could possibly go to, therefore the knight becomes totally useless, and after that you win the game easily by just advancing your pawn. Let's say he tries to bring the king closer, you can ignore it completely and just promote it into a new queen. The same idea, keeping your piece 2 squares away from a knight, works out not only with a bishop but also with a king, a queen, or a pawn. Think of a position like that, which is very standard, make them out of the Italian game or the roll-up or something like that. In such positions, GMs often puzzle other players for playing c3 right here instead of playing knight to c3. And knight c3 feels such a natural move, bringing the knight into play, following standard opening rules, but GMs usually instead play pawn to c3. And here now this knight seems like it's kind of stuck there in the corner. So why would GMs play this move? And there are two main reasons. One is, yes, white is hoping to grab the center after pawn d4, but the second reason is exactly to restrict this knight, because think about this, we took away all the forward squares where this knight could possibly go to. Like, what can possibly black play with this knight in this game, in the future, in the long run? Maybe not right now. Like, do they want to bring it back to the original square? Like, bring it here to e7 and completely, restrict all the other pieces of black, move it to the side where it doesn't do anything? You see, this piece becomes kind of useless because our little pawn move, which took away these 2 squares. Here's the next example. It is black to play. Once again, you may think, how would you play here if you were black? And we're actually moving on to the next section, common attacking patterns leading to a knight fork. So, in this position, the most played move by black is knight to e7, and it's hard to believe that such a natural developing move is actually a decisive blunder, because it overlooks knight g5, and now these 2 pieces attack the pawn on f7, and there is no way for black to defend it. Rather, they can move the pawn away, but then here comes this fork, and black is going to realize that it was a rookie error. They're going to lose their rook in the corner. So, what's the issue here? That is actually the most common attacking pattern with a knight. Think of the fried liver attack. We usually have the knight right here on f3, and therefore jumping to g5 is just so simple and natural, and together with this bishop, they can put together this really quick but devastating attack leading to this knight fork. The same fork may appear on the other side of the board, on the queen side. In this position, white's got the knight on the right square already, so how can white deliver this fork on c7? Right now the square is guarded by the queen. One of the standard ways, as we know, is to develop a bishop and to provide one more attack to the same square. And in some positions, that just wins the game on the spot. However, in the current situation, it does not work because black has this move knight to d5, which guards this square and hits the bishop, and that saves the day for black. Nevertheless, in this position, white can still force this fork, but being a little bit more creative. They can play d5, and that's another common tactical pattern exploiting the same knight fork. Now, initially it may seem like black is attacking this pawn twice with their knight and queen, while white defends it only once with their queen. However, if black captures the pawn, that leads to the most powerful move ever, a triple fork to most valuable pieces of black, and white wins the game. If instead black captures it with a knight, can you see the wait for white to get it done? Yes, they need to sack the queen first, but it's a temporary sacrifice because on the next move, they get the same fork, they're going to get their queen back, and they end up with an extra piece. This time you're attacking, it's white to move. Can you find a winning move for white here? Well, since we're talking about a knight fork, you may have guessed that you probably need to move the knight. And the winning move for white here is knight to d5. We hit the queen and sacrifice our bishop, but if black captures it, there is this knight to c7 similar fork. And I think that you can clearly see the pattern. Right, in all these variations, we've got the knight standing here on c3, jumping forward, in most cases to b5, aiming for this fork. Sometimes, like in this case, we rerouted the knight through this square, but finally we are aiming to the same square, c7, and that's how you win the game. And here's another super common way to make use of the same attacking pattern, the so-called Jobava London system. With all respect to Jobava, we gotta call it Chihuahua opening. Sounds cute. Anyways, in the Jobava, knight to c6 is a super common blunder of black. It's been played in millions of games, and I hope that by now it's going to be a piece of cake for you to see the winning move for white here. It's the move knight to b5. And now you know that. It's not just a sudden tactical trick, no, it's actually the most common way to deliver a knight fork in chess. Jumping with the knight forward, aiming for this square, and using our bishop as a supportive piece. And indeed black is in trouble. Now knight takes c7 is a threat. If after this we're gonna fork the king and rook. If they try e5 to block the diagonal, then at least they're losing a pawn. And after the knight moves, can you see the way to continue our attack here? If their queen is guarding this pawn, sometimes it gives us a hint that we need to deflect the queen. And you can do that with a spectacular move, queen takes d5. Temporarily sacrifice the queen, but after knight takes c7, we finally made it happen. And after the king moves and we capture the queen back, we end up with 3 extra pawns and a winning position. Now let's talk about the coolest and the most brutal part. What to do if you blunder the fork already? How to fight back? Because of course I do hope that you will understand these tactical patterns and will not blunder them, but stuff happens. In this position, actually queen takes d5, the correct move, happened in only 9% of games because most players did not watch this video. The most played move by far is pawn e6, simply trying to open up this diagonal and trying to deliver this knight takes c7 fork right on the next move. So how do you fight back if you found yourself in a position like that, where your opponent has already put together this attack against you? Now, there is an important thing to realize here. Although, of course, losing material is generally speaking bad, but there is a clear downside to your opponent's plan. They have to spend a lot of moves to win that material. They have to bring the knight here, then here, then here, then grab the rook, and then possibly try to retreat back, right? They're trying this grab and run thing. And that takes a lot of time. During that time, even if you happened to lose material, you can actually put together your own counterattack. And in that case, it might be effective not to even worry about this pawn at all, and instead of playing some defensive passive moves, try to be more aggressive and start your own attack. In this case, black can play bishop c5, kind of ignoring the threat, and if your opponent lightheartedly captures the pawn thinking, oh, that's cool, I actually got that fork, you say, no problem. You sack the queen, and on the next move, you deliver this checkmate. Even if your opponent noticed the threat, it's still not easy for them to figure out what to do next, because let's say they try to block the diagonal. Then you have time to castle, and now your king is safe. Let's say they grab this pawn, attack your rook. What are you going to do there? Well, we know that our plan is actually not to defend, but rather to put together our own counterattack using all this time that we have. So instead of guarding this rook, you can capture here, let them grab the rook, and now, yes, they won material, but again, they spent so much time doing so, and now their knight is out of game. While you have completed your development virtually, and you're ready to attack. So you could play something like e5, kicking off this bishop, but in this position it's even stronger to play rook takes f4, sacrificing the rook, and unblock this diagonal, which allows you that bishop takes f2 check, and then it's quite clear to see that white is in big trouble. Within a couple moves, something like this, you're going to have all these checkmating threats and you're winning the game. Of course, I don't mean to say that finding this whole variation would be an easy thing for black, it's actually quite advanced, but for now I hope that you grasp that overall idea, that you let your opponent execute their threat and grab your material, however you use that time to put together your own counterattack. And in general, if you wish to learn how to become a strong attacking player and to find those moves by yourself and to calculate them, feel free to check my free masterclass by clicking the link below the video in the description. The second strategy to counter a fork is also super effective. I actually didn't know it in the past and I once lost a painful game, but then I learned the lesson. So here, imagine you blundered that move knight to b5. Now you're dealing with this fork threat. What do? Naturally, when we're attacked, we think how to defend. And if there is no way to defend, then we're just not sure what to do at all. But here's the idea. Since these two pieces are the only ones that are causing troubles, you may be thinking how to actually attack them. And let's say initially, yes, to stop this, you have to give up this pawn, there is no other way. But once this pawn is captured, you may ask yourself, can I attack one of these two pieces because they are the source of a problem? So can you attack a knight or a bishop somehow in this position? And the answer is yes, you can actually do either of them. You can attack the bishop by going knight h5, and white would have to deal with that. Therefore, it is already much better than, knight e4, which was a passive move, and it allowed white to play queen takes d5 or e6 and to keep attacking you. So knight h5 is the way to attack the bishop, or is there a way to attack this knight? Yes, there is a move pawn a6. So actually both of these moves challenge your opponent and do not let them, execute their attack that easily. So pawn a6 is actually a very solid attempt. They'll have to either retreat their knight, or if they take right here, you recapture, that also opens up this file for your rook. This pawn is hanging after they trade, that also puts your bishop to this nice diagonal, and yes, white won just a pawn, however now you've got this active bishop, you've got an active rook, you're ahead in development, and you have great compensation. In fact, it's pretty hard for white to play this position properly because, yeah, now they're the one defending, because they lost all this time to horse around. If, let's say, they try to block this diagonal by going pawn c3, you can break open it once again, putting pressure down here, and they can easily find themselves in trouble. Like if they trade, you play queen takes, you still attack everything around. If queen takes, you can recapture, and this time you're doing the same thing to them, and it's not easy for them to stop this actually, because if they move the rook away anyhow, if they move the king right here, they can blunder something like knight to b3. Pretty cool. If instead they do something like, let's say, castle or move the rook away, that's gonna drop this pawn on a2. And after that, you know, it can even lead to some checkmate like this. Notice our bishop from g7. Once I played this game, I was playing white and I played d4, just kind of standard opening move, but all of a sudden my opponent responded knight to b4, threatening this fork together with the bishop support. And at the time, I wasn't a grandmaster yet, I think I was a FIDE Master, and I didn't know how to handle this fork threat, so I was kind of upset, beating myself up for blundering this move, and I lost the game later. But then I realized, once I analyzed this with computer, that there is this idea that if you want to fight back after you've blundered this fork, you need to challenge these two pieces, either a knight or a bishop. Those two attackers, you're trying to challenge them. And here, yes, after knight takes c2, it's also attacking your king, so you may wish to castle. But after knight takes c2, attacking the rook, instead of doing anything about the rook, you may think, hey, can I challenge these two pieces somehow? And there is a pretty paradoxical move, which actually wins the game for white. Not just saves the day, but wins the game. It's the move pawn g4. You want to deflect this bishop, and all of a sudden it turns things around. At the time, I hadn't thought about this move at all, but g4 is really strong. Now, if the bishop goes away, that's pretty simple. That actually blunders this knight on c2. Now, how about them grabbing the rook? Well, in this case, you got a bishop for your rook, plus this knight is cornered, and it's pretty easy for you to win it after that. It can't run away, right? All these squares are under your control. So if he plays whatever, you can, let's say, just bring your bishop out, and on the next move grab a knight. You're going to have two minor pieces for a rook, and you've got a great position. So that is also good for white. Finally, if black were to capture this pawn with their knight, then after knight g3 we keep challenging this bishop, and now it's kind of shaky for black because all their minor pieces are under the attack, plus their king is still centralized, and it's easy to see that black is probably going to feel quite bad within the next couple moves. Let's say they grab the rook, now we capture this bishop, now this knight is hanging. If it moves back, you can do different things, for example, just bring the bishop out, get this knight, and keep attacking. To wrap things up, there are basically a couple main ideas to never lose due to blundering a knight fork like that. So one way is just to restrict a knight so that it simply can't go forward. For instance, if I were to play pawn c3, my pawn would control these two squares and he would never be able to move forward, and that just gets the job done. But if you found yourself in a position where you blunder that fork already, there are two options from here. One is to ignore that threat completely and to go for your own counterattack. For instance, here after something like this, I could have tried, bishop b7, threatening rook, maybe this check, and I could have tried to put together my own attack. So that is one idea. Or the second idea is to challenge these two pieces which are the ones attacking you. You may attack them, and this way sometimes you can actually even gain the upper hand. One more question you guys have asked me is making a video about pawn structures and how to level up your positional understanding. Actually, I've got a video already. You may check it out right here.